Thank you, Bryce. So let's bow
have.
our...
We're looking forward to hearing your message.
Sorry, there was a pause. I thought the internet went out. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each and every one of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you alone, God, are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Well, since it is April Fool's weekend, if you have never read the Song of Solomon, you might think that this passage was an April Fool's joke. This text really isn't in the Bible, is it? But I'm not playing a joke. This text is smack right in the middle of the Bible. And while Song of Solomon is rarely preached about, I'm going to do my best to preach on it today. So first, what is the Song of Solomon, which is also known as the Song of Songs? It is 8 chapters of erotic poetry, not set in a Harlequin romance novel, but again, it's in our Bible. It's filled with beautiful images that might make those of us who are a little bit more puritanical blush, but it's there, and it's there for us to ponder this morning. So what do we know about the Song of Songs? Scholars date its composition from any time between the 10th century BC to the 3rd century BC. And the very first verse attributes this text to King Solomon. But I want us to know that this is a common practice in the Bible that is used to make a text authoritative. So this happens too with the Pauline letters. There are 7 undisputed Pauline letters, but some of them at the very beginning attribute the text to Paul, even though scholars can tell by looking at the writings that it was not a text written by Paul because of the way that he speaks and the language of his day. So we attribute this text to Solomon, but it was likely not written by him. And we'll talk a little bit later about who may have written the Song of Songs. Also, Solomon was one who was supposed to have over 100 wives and concubines. And so the deep intimacy in this text makes most biblical scholars agree that this was not written by Solomon. So one of the things I want to point out again is that we call this the Song of Songs. And why did we call this the Song of Songs? Well, in Hebrew, it is Shir Hashrim, which is literally the Song of Songs. And in Hebrew, when something is the Lord of Lords or the Holy of Holies, this means it is the greatest and best. So this is the greatest and best of songs. And we do know that the Song of Songs was a very revered text in early Jewish culture. And it was one that was likely sung and it was passed down orally. But I'll talk more about that a little later in the sermon. Interpreters have worked really hard to offer spiritual reflections on this poetry. Some Jewish interpreters have said it's a metaphor for our relationship with God. And likewise, some Christian interpreters have said it speaks to the deep love that Christ has for us. While these interpretations have some validity, they also direct us away from the depth of human love, the body, and intimacy that are all gifts from God. Renita Weems, who is a theology professor at Vanderbilt University, says that the Song of Songs is the only book in the Bible where a woman's voice is in first person. She says the lyrics in this book are songs originally written by women that would have been sung at wedding ceremonies and in traditional day-to-day activities. Even though male editors may have done the final editing, again, by adding things like attributing this to King Solomon, most biblical scholars agree that this book was composed by either one woman or several females. So this may have been the only book in the Bible written by a woman. And the woman in these 8 chapters is an unnamed Shulamite woman from the village of Shalom. I remember being shocked in seminary. So I was in seminary 20 years ago. And so this was even more shocking then, I think, for me to find out from my Old Testament teacher, who was a renowned Old Testament teacher at Emory, that this woman was likely an unmarried working class woman who had fallen in love with a shepherd. So you heard that right. This is a celebration of love. And it's even potentially, if he was right, and if a lot of biblical scholars are right, again, Renita Weems from Vanderbilt would also agree with this, that this text doesn't really jive with the Pauline views of sex that are a little bit more defined. So in today's text, the shepherd says to his beloved, "You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." And then the Shulamite woman says to her shepherd, "Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruit." So again, this is an explicit passage, but also one that's filled with tenderness, love, and affirmation. Several years ago, I was in Dunkin' Donuts and I was ordering either tea or coffee. I can't even remember now, when I saw a young couple dancing and singing. And as I watched them, I realized that at one point in my life, I would have judged their brazen actions. But as I witnessed them sing, dance, and laugh, I was in awe of their embodiment. And I realized that I wanted to live life in a more embodied way, but also a less buttoned up way. Fast forward many years later, and I'm with my daughter and my niece in St. Elmo at Clumpy's, where there's an outdoor patio. And the 3 of us were singing, dancing on the porch. And I didn't have any embarrassment. I've always been one of those people that kind of follows the rules, that does the shoulds, and that probably hasn't given myself enough permission to move in my body. But that's been changing. I've been working on that. And while this may not have been the sexual embodiment we see in the Song of Songs, dancing is one of the many ways we can move in our bodies and celebrate the gift of life. So what I love about the Song of Songs is that it suggests that sexuality and spirituality, or maybe we could say the body and the soul, are intimately tied together. Our bodies matter to God. And as we hear the shepherd tell his beloved that there is no flaw in her, we experience a celebration that the body is good and beautiful. It's almost as if we hear God saying in Genesis, God looked on creation, God looked on the body and said, "It is good." Well, in my work as a licensed marriage and family therapist, body issues are present in at least half of my clients, probably more. And research proves that 1 out of 3 adults has felt down or low because of their body image in the past year. And you don't have to raise your hand, but I bet that many of you would agree with that. I bet that at some point in our lives, many of us or most of us have felt some shame about the body. I know for myself, I felt it deeply when I was going through infertility because it took us over 7 years to get pregnant. And I felt like I didn't measure up to other women. You know, it was hard to feel my body failing me. I can even feel emotional about it right now. Likewise, during the pandemic and after giving birth, like a lot of people, I gained weight and I dealt with some body shame at that time. So a lot of us do struggle with body shame, and I have to work with my clients, but I also have to do my own work to look at the negative stories that I have about my body, to think about where they've come from in my story, and to find a new one. And for most of us, this is lifelong work. We have to work constantly at finding healthier and new narratives about our bodies. So often we've had parents, maybe partners, maybe somebody in our family system or even in our friend system who did not tell us the message that we were altogether beautiful, that there was no flaw in us. Instead, our flaws were pointed out. I can actually remember one time when a beloved member of my family said to me that my butt was the beginning of the end. I had to struggle with that. That's harsh, right? But we have people who point out things about our body along the way, and then we have to work at undoing these negative stories. So I do believe that examining the stories we have about our bodies and working on positive self-talk, but also moving in our body through dance, through yoga, through walking, through sex, are all pathways to becoming more like the lovers in our text today. Because as we read Song of Songs, if you really read this text, you see such a confidence in the body, a comfort in the body that is rare, right? So as we focus on such an embodied text, and again, this might cause us some discomfort to even read this text, I encourage you to do that, to read all 8 chapters of the Song of Solomon. I think that could be part of the self-work of getting more comfortable with our bodies. But as we look at this embodied text, I think it's really important for me to say today that our bodies matter to God. For such a long time, Christianity focused on the spiritual and treated the flesh as sinful. And nothing could be further from the truth. God created bodies and called them good. Jesus came in the flesh. We have an incarnational story. That is what is distinctive about the Christian story. Jesus lived, ate, drank, slept, talked, prayed. Our bodies matter to God. To treat anyone as less than valuable denies the goodness of God creating that body. Our faith is embodied. When I was a pastor in the British Methodist Church, I became friends with a man from Cork, Ireland. I had met him on a trip to Wales, and we kept in touch by phone for several months. He was a creative and smart young man, but as he spoke about the religious and political divide in his country, I experienced anger that was unfamiliar to me. I remember he shared with me his resentment towards Irish Protestants. He was a Catholic. Of course, that felt ironic to me because I was serving as a Protestant minister in the UK. But even though his political and religious anger felt unfamiliar to me 20 years ago, it doesn't anymore. Currently, our own divide in the US harkens me back to the resentful feelings I felt from my Irish friend. It was hard for me to hear him rant in a way that did not acknowledge the image of God in his Protestant neighbors. Just as it is challenging now to accept our own state of disconnection and anger in this country. Just this week, I was talking to a friend and I told them that I had been at a coffee shop. And in the coffee shop, I'd seen a famous politician who happened to be a Republican. And I said I was only sitting like 1 seat away from this famous Republican. And my friend said to me, was he arrogant? And again, I think that's a statement on where we are right now. No matter what our politics are, we almost look for the bad in people who are different from us. And this is a friend of mine who is a wonderful person. But this is where we are as a country. We're looking for what is not good in one another instead of seeing the beauty in one another. The Song of Solomon, again, is an embodied text. And Matthew Fox calls this type of theology creation spirituality, as opposed to redemption theology. Redemption theology focuses on our sin. Creation spirituality centers on our beauty. Redemption theology says, my religion is the only way to God. Creation spirituality fosters deep respect for the spark of the divine in all. Redemption theology is ascetic and denies bodily pleasure, while creation spirituality is sensual. In redemption theology, right thinking takes precedence, while in creation spirituality, compassion, justice, and celebration are the goals of spirituality. And all that I shared comes from the work of Matthew Fox, who is an Episcopal priest. But let me be clear, even though he separates redemption theology from creation spirituality, redemption theology is not all bad. We do sin and we do fall short of the glory of God. The problem is that for far too long, Christianity has overemphasized redemption theology and underemphasized creation spirituality, and also underemphasized texts like the Song of Solomon. The Song of Solomon only appears in the lectionary one time. And again, this has led to a lot of shame, but also shaming. When we view ourselves as bad, we view one another as bad. And this dualistic thinking of seeing one another and ourselves as good or bad, right or wrong, has led to where we are now as a country. That's why I love the reverence for the body in our text today. It is a text of intimacy. If we break down the word intimacy, which I learned this from one of my supervisors when I was training to be a therapist, the word could be into me see. Let me repeat that one more time. If we break it down, the word intimacy, the word could be into me see. Intimacy requires seeing and celebrating one another. As Brene Brown says, people are hard to hate close up. Move in closer. Right now, Will Smith's behavior at the Oscar is all the buzz. His reaction and decision to hit Chris Rock is a statement about how defensive and reactive we are right now as a culture. And while I hate what happened and agree with others who've said that this way of violence being normalized on national TV will be something that has long-term consequences that can't even be seen yet, and I do agree with that. On the other hand, what happened is also a reminder of how quick we are to categorize one another as good or bad. Will Smith has been villainized by some and celebrated by others. And while I don't agree with his actions, just like all of us, he is a person who has made mistakes and has also created beauty in this world. I think of my dad, who, when I was a teenager, he was struggling with alcoholism. And I can remember him using his fist to punch a hole in the wall and doing other things that were not great, that mirrored Will Smith's behavior. And yet I can also remember him as a man who, once he found his sobriety, picked up an older adult with Down syndrome every week and took him to the movies or to his mother's grave. There's such beauty and pain in all of us. We're all broken and beautiful, aren't we? If we look for that in one another. And as we look for that in one another, we nurture that in one another. I talked with Catherine about preaching on this text before the war started in the Ukraine. And when the war started, I thought about changing my text, but I decided that this love song is what the world needs. Especially, it's what the Ukraine needs right now, and Russia needs it too. And we here in the United States also need this love song. This text is a call for intimacy. Again, the word intimacy means into me see. It's a call to move in closer and to see one another. I believe this war is not what God has in mind for us. God's desire is for us to be at peace with one another. And so we must take a stand against what is happening in the Ukraine in varied ways and be proponents of peace in the midst of this awful war. But make no mistake that there is also a strong divide here in our midst that could also lead to something tragic. And as the church, we are called by God to stand up for the value of human love, and through our words and actions embody love for one another and ourselves. As Mary Monroe's poem said, feel love's presence. Let love find you. Feel love's presence. Let love find you. And as we hear in our scripture today, We need to be saying to ourselves and to one another in varied ways, you are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. And even though there are flaws in us, for we do fall short of the glory of God, we're also beautiful, and we need to see one another as whole people, broken and beautiful. Amen.